I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the thunder crashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you
to defeat anti-Semitism and defend our Jewish citizens. My first week back in the Oval Office, my administration will inform every college president that if you do not end anti-Semitic propaganda, they will lose their accreditation and federal taxpayer support. Truth is, you don't have to do much after that. When you do that, it's going to work miracles. Please sit down.
Miracles.
We will not subsidize the creation of terrorist sympathizers, and we're not going to do it certainly on American soil. We're not going to do it anywhere. Next, I will inform every educational institution in our land that if they permit violence, harassment, or threats against Jewish students, the schools will be held accountable for violations of the civil rights law. Very important. Jewish Americans must have equal protection under the law. They're going to get it. At the same time,
they don't have it now?
The administration will move swiftly to restore safety for Jewish students and Jewish people on American streets.
Okay, so apparently Jewish people don't have equal protection under the law anymore. So this is leadership. Trump to universities, stampism or lose accreditation. So let's hear from the soon-to-be extinct U.S. Department of Education. That's one of his plans as well. Accreditation is a review of the quality of higher education institutions. Your college loses said accreditation. Federal state grants are not available. Students cannot get federal or state loans. The degrees are not recognized. That is a pretty good way of connecting those dots, because what Trump is talking about here is the crackdown on campus speech, campus quote-unquote anti-Semitism, which of course means pro-Palestine, anti-genocide speech. Elise Stefanik is of course his UN ambassador pick, who had almost all of the viral moments when it came to grilling the heads of the Ivy League schools, who were then under fire, all of whom subsequently resigned their posts at Harvard, Columbia, and UPenn. Here she is, though, in Israel, letting you know who she is.
As long as I serve the American people, I will defend George Washington's vision of religious pluralism and freedom. Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home and supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions, to achieve total victory in the face of evil. Chants of death to America are not hollow slogans. They are a promise that what happened here on October 7th could happen in the United States unless Hamas and its jihadist accomplices are eliminated. And it is the United States' high honor and high responsibility to support Israel's effort. I have been clear at home, and I will be clear here. There is no excuse for an American president to block aid to Israel, aid that was duly passed by the Congress. There is no excuse to ease sanctions on Iran, paying a $6 billion ransom to the world's leading state sponsor of terror, or to dither and hide while our friends fight for their lives. No excuse, full stop. That's why I'm proud to have sponsored or backed every measure to aid Israel that has come before the United States Congress. Every single one. And it's why for years I have been a leading proponent and partner to President Trump in his historic support for Israeli independence and security, including moving the U.S. Embassy to its rightful place in Jerusalem, Israel is indeed a miracle, an outpost of freedom, of Western values, of civilization, a striking example of human potential, the physical embodiment of Herzl's maxim, if you will it, it is no dream. It's the same founding ethos that we prize in America.
We will remove the jihadist sympathizers and Jew haters. We're going to remove the Jew haters who do nothing to help our country. They only want to destroy our country. And we will never let the horrors of October 7th be repeated here on American soil. We will not let.
So what he's saying, so if you criticize, correct me if I'm wrong, is he saying that if you criticize Israel, he could kind of call you a Jew hater, and he's going to get rid of you? That's what he said, right? Let's listen.
We will remove the jihadist sympathizers and
Why can't I sympathize with anybody I want? Why? So a political opinion he's making illegal. That's what Trump wants to do. He wants all this stuff about free speech. He's not for it. And all the people in charge of Columbia University and USC, they want to shut down the protesters. They all are in on this. So they're all against speech they don't like. And why don't they like it? Because they're all Israel first people. They're not America first. If you were America first, you'd protect the First Amendment rights of the people who live here, even if they're saying something. When I was a kid, the Nazis literally would march every year in Skokie, which is a suburb where a lot of Jews lived in Chicago. And the Jews allowed them to march because the Jews in Skokie loved freedom of speech more than they hated those Nazis. And so you gotta, I'm for freedom of speech, unless it's speech I really don't like, or my donors don't like. Because his number one donor is that Sheldon Adelson's wife, who gave him $100 million. That should upset you, and you should put pressure on Trump to follow the First Amendment. CNN, Trump vows to remove the Jew haters if reelected during events commemorating October 7th.
Hey, you know what? How about this?
He never mentioned
students into communists and terrorists and sympathizers of many, many different dimensions. We can't let this happen. It's time to offer something dramatically different. Under the plan I'm announcing today, we will take the billions and billions of dollars that we will collect by taxing, fining, and suing excessively large private university endowments, and we will then use that money to endow a new institution called the American Academy. Its mission will be to make a truly world-class education available to every American, free of charge, and do it without adding a single dime to the federal debt. This institution will gather an entire universe of the highest quality educational content covering the full spectrum of human knowledge and skills, and make that material available to every American citizen online for free. Whether you want lectures or ancient histories or an introduction to financial accounting, the Academy will award the full and complete equivalent of a bachelor's degree. In addition, to help the 40 million Americans who have some college education but no degree, the American Academy will grant credit for past coursework at legacy institutions and give you the chance to complete your education at the American Academy for free and much more quickly than is now possible or available. This will be a revolution in higher education and will provide life-changing opportunities for tens of millions of our citizens. Enjoy it, learn from it, and thank you.
Blow them shofars. Whoever got a shofar in the house, I don't care if you're up here or not, just blow them shofars. When they blow them shofars, I want you to lift the lid off this place with shout to the Lord, with praise to the Lord. I just want, as soon as you hear that shofar start to blowing, I want you to shout the whole canvas off of this tent right now, because I'm telling you, God's people are victorious. They will win. We will win. We stand with them. We're the watchmen on the wall. We blow that shofar in victory now, and then let's shout, shall we? I want to pray on the front end, because I don't want things to bleed too much into the message, because I'll get a little stirred up. And I got some other faith-filled things that I want to preach on. I don't want anybody in-house or online to say, oh, I thought he wasn't going to get political. This is not political statements that I'm about to make. Okay, these ain't Republican, Democrat statements. These are Genesis chapter 12. I will bless them that bless Israel, and I will curse them that curse Israel. That's what this is. Ain't nothing political about what I'm about to say, but it's going to seem a little bit political, and that's okay, because I'm going to say a couple of things that online is going to stir some people up, and in-house may weed out a few busybodies. Okay? You came to the wrong service today if you thought I was going to talk about these poor, beat down, oppressed Palestinians. That's a bunch of nonsense that's been pushed by the media. Okay? What we would call them, the Bible would call what you would consider Palestinians, which really is a made-up word. There's no such person. All the land belongs to Israel, and the Bible declares that.
The stars are falling, fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the thunder crashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the stars are falling. Fare thee well, fare thee well. Fare thee well in that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, when you hear the thunder crashing, when you see the stars are falling, when you hear the chariots calling. Good news, chariots coming. Good news, chariots coming. So glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out.
There's a long white robe in the heaven I know.
Long white robe in the heavens I know. Long white robe in the heavens I know. I said good news, chariots coming. Good news, chariots coming. So glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the thunder crashing. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the stars are falling. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the chariots calling. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning. Fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, when you hear the thunder crashing, when you see the stars are falling, when you hear the chariots calling, good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out.
There's a long white robe in the heaven I know.
Long white robe in the heavens I know. Long white robe in the heavens I know. I said good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the thunder crashing, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the stars are falling, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the chariots calling, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, when you hear the thunder crashing, when you see the stars are falling, when you hear the chariots calling, good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out.
There's a long white robe in the heaven I know.
Long white robe in the heavens I know. Long white robe in the heavens I know. I said good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. I'm gonna tell you about the coming of the judgment. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. There's a better day coming. Fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the thunder crashing, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the stars are falling, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you hear the chariots calling, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. When you see the lightning flashing, when you hear the thunder crashing, when you see the stars are falling, when you hear the chariots calling, good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out.
There's a long white robe in the heaven I know.
Long white robe in the heavens I know. Long white robe in the heavens I know. I said good news, chariots coming, good news, chariots coming, so glad, chariots coming, and I don't want to be left out. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well. In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well.
Were you when my night fell and pieces shattered everywhere? If I had loved you with my whole heart, time will tell. Time will tell. Were the stars moving across the ocean? Did the world turn away for just a glance? And leave me here in these ashes. I will weep, I will dance. 'Cause all I have is yours. All these ashes and these sores, all that I am living for, I will follow you to shore. Well, I hear your voice and it sounds angry. I have questioned you time and again. So I'll be here in the silence till I can walk. I will stay.
July, the United States again isolated, furiously attacking the International Criminal Court's decision to issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. Most European nations say they'll execute the warrants if either man steps on their soil. So what might happen next? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. From statesman to wanted man in a day, the latest turn in the career of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The arrest warrants for him and his former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant are historic. They're accused of crimes against humanity in Israel's war on Gaza. 44,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been killed, most of them women and children. Their plight is largely ignored in Israel, in stark contrast to the furious reaction which has erupted there since the warrants were issued. In the US, Israel's biggest weapons supplier and ally, politicians have found rare unity too, expressing fury and threatening the court with sanctions. So how damaging is this to Israel and its standing in the world? What might it mean for Israel's allies and arms suppliers? And is the rule of international law on trial too? We'll speak to our guests shortly, but first this report from Laura Khan.
A ruling by the International Criminal Court on Thursday has made Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant wanted men. By issuing arrest warrants for the two Israeli politicians on charges of committing war crimes, the ICC has polarised the world. There's been a predictably furious response from Israel and its greatest ally, the US.
It is falsely accusing me, the democratically elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel, and Israel's former Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, of deliberately targeting civilians. This when we do everything in our power to avoid civilian casualties.
US President Joe Biden called it outrageous, and some senators said they would look into sanctioning the court. The US has committed a record amount of military aid to Israel since October 7th, 2023.
We remain deeply concerned by the prosecutor's rush to seek arrest warrants and the troubling process errors that led to this decision.
However, most of Europe and the rest of the world say they'll uphold the court's decision and arrest Netanyahu or Gallant if they travel to their territory.
This decision is a binding decision, and all states, which include all members of the European Union, are binding to implement this court decision.
Some of Israel's strongest allies are in Europe, meaning there's division there too. Hungary's right-wing Prime Minister Viktor Orban says he will defy the warrant by inviting Netanyahu to visit. A spokesperson for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said Britain would respect the jurisdiction of the ICC. One human rights lawyer says the day of reckoning for Israel's leaders was bound to come.
Israel, as a state, over the last 75 years, has ignored the rule of law. That's what it's really about. Not about a just war. It's about an unjust state that has never respected the rule of law.
While lawyers and politicians argue, life for people in Gaza remains a daily struggle for survival as Israel's relentless onslaught continues. Those who survive the daily bombardment face starvation and disease, many living just under sheets of plastic or flimsy tents.
These leaders are above the law on an international level. This is a rogue nation, and the rules of the International Court are not implemented.
For some, the case is a test of international legal mechanisms. The US does not recognize the ICC, but has nonetheless enthusiastically supported cases against its foes, including Russia's President Vladimir Putin. In this case, the ability of the court to dispense even-handed justice is also on trial. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.